reporters over the years, she has such a deep experience in economic policy as well as research. And unusually, she's at the coalface of many major transformation initiatives. During her time at the CSIR, they did incredible work looking at the causes of unemployment, the extreme unemployment challenges that South Africa is confronted with. So over the years, she has contributed immensely towards the policy direction of this country. And in fact, at the moment, she's the current lead drafter of the South African government's National Infrastructure Plan for 2050. So she's looking at major work. She's also a professor of the Fourth Industrial Revolution practice in the Department of Economics at the University of Johannesburg. So please, let's welcome our keynote for this morning, and that is Dr. Miriam Altman.
Hi, everybody. I'm sorry I couldn't be with you. What a great event. But so today I'll be speaking about the just energy transition. Some people may not like what I have to say, but I think that's why I was actually invited to do this talk. So the first issue that arises is, what is the just energy transition? And I think that actually deserves good definition, because there's an element which is the energy transition, and there's the just element within that. So the first question is, and I'm sorry if many people who are here will know quite a lot of what I'm going to say by introduction, but I think it's important to bring everybody together so then we can talk about how we engage in this issue. So the first issue is, what is the energy transition? So it's the structural shift from fossil fuel to clean energy sources, in essence. And because South Africa is one of the top global greenhouse gas emitters, with energy and transport being at the center of that, largely due to our coal dependence, it's particularly important in South Africa's case, and also offers great opportunity. But there are transitions and challenges around that. So why is it important? Well, you've been talking about it already, is that climate change is obviously wreaking havoc on the environment, and in turn on economies and living standards in all kinds of ways that we don't even know yet. But we've already seen evidence of it, for example, flooding in Durban, etc. So we've seen, drought in Cape Town. We've seen lots of examples of that. But as it happens, there's also an opportunity, because South Africa happens to have a comparative advantage in the new energy sources, especially wind and solar, that are now significantly provided at a lower cost. So it's an important opportunity in a context where we have an energy shortage and where there are fiscal constraints. So in a way, there's a very important opportunity for a country like South Africa in this. So what is South Africa's commitment to this? Well, we have a nationally determined contribution, which means that there are goals for the reduction in CO2 emissions. They have fallen dramatically over the years. In other words, the commitment has strengthened over the years, and there are mitigation goals for 2025 and 2030, with focus on energy waste, industrial processes, agriculture, and forestry. So South Africa is committed to achieving between 350 and 420 megatons of CO2 emission by 2030, which is actually a significantly lower target than what it was. So in other words, we've been upping our game in terms of the commitments. The upper end is consistent with the IRP 2019, and the lower end, like in other words, 350, is consistent with what would happen if we had a bit of a more rapid closure of coal-fired plants and the introduction of 6 gigawatts of renewable energy per annum. What I should say is, currently, just to compare, the pre-COVID emissions were already at 470 megatons in any case. Currently, they're at 435. So you would think that we're actually almost at the upper end target. Having said that, the reason that it's so low is because the economy has been shrinking. So that's why I was giving a pre-COVID figure. Now, what's the just element within that transition? There are always winners and losers in any transition. And the just element, of course, is about helping stakeholders to cross over, including companies, investors, workers, and communities. Now, what I'm going to do further down in the presentation is talk about analogies to this transition, because one of the things that was not mentioned in my introduction was that I was chief of strategy at Telecom for its turnaround. And there, that was an example, to be honest, of a transition that was as big as this one in relation to jobs, and it is not unique. It is the kind of thing that that we go through over time, and it's just that this one is very politically charged, and I'll speak to that further down. But I wanted to contextualize that. Now, South Africa's declaration. We have a political declaration that emanates from the NDP and guides the Just Energy Transition Investment Plan. And I won't speak to this in detail, but basically it covers what the nationally determined contribution should be and how it should be set, the just element within it, how we'll be developing local value chains, stoking the opportunities for technological innovation, how we help people get across the line. So what's the Just Energy Transition Partnership? That was forged at the 2021 COP26 climate summit, where the US, UK, France, Germany, and the EU pledged $8.5 billion over 3 to 5 years to support the energy transition away from coal towards a low carbon economy. And I should just say that I have provided these slides to the organizers, and they should be available to you, I suppose, as notes. Which is how I've organized this, because sometimes it's nice to have these things laid out clearly. Now, these are not grants. These are largely possibly concessional loans, investments, technical support, that kind of thing. And the projects planned include the variation from helping to transition from, say, coal to renewables, and also to help mitigate the impacts. Now, the Just Energy Transition Investment Plan outlines the financing requirements. That was where Daniel Manelli was leading last year. So he was designing this, the financing requirements and where funds should be channeled across infrastructure, planning and implementation capability, skills development, economic diversification, innovation, and the social investments required. And so including the mitigation impacts and helping along with the transition. Now, I just think that we should get the coal story straight, because I think there's a lot of mixing of storylines within this. And this is where I may anger a few people, I don't know. But again, I think that's why I was invited. So, so if we get the coal story straight, firstly, there are heavy entrenched interests, and these are positioned against the renewable energy lobbyists. And we have arguments like it's really coal versus renewable energy. And that's partly because the interests are so powerful, and therefore the backlash against that is quite strong. So this has led to a very slow energy transition in South Africa, especially in relation to soft pedaling around the bringing on of new sources of power. Now, the thing I want to say is, in my view, and maybe it'll just generate a bit of debate, the introduction of renewable energy is not driving coal out of business. I personally do not believe that these things truly are, at least in the next 10 to 15 years, they aren't really butting heads in the way that it's positioned in general argumentation. And I think it's a problem because in the way these things are being positioned, because they're seen as contested, they're promoted as contested, they fire people up, and it slows the transition down with very much heavier socioeconomic costs than are related to anything related to the coal industry itself. I hope that makes sense. And I'm going to explain what I mean. So coal-fired power does not equate to coal production. I know that sounds funny, but it's not the same thing. They're linked, but they're not the same thing. South African coal-fired power and syn fuels definitely require coal by definition. But coal has other outlets. So coal-fired power will remain important for many years, even if a diminishing one. This means coal mines will still be needed. So almost half of coal production is exported, and global demand actually is growing, even if at a diminished rate. So it's actually the decision around how fast coal mines are expanding, which they may well do, or contracting, is only partly related to what happens with Eskom coal-fired plants. And a much bigger issue is probably related to our inability to get coal out the door to export markets, quite frankly. We may not want to be mining coal and we may not want to be selling it, but the problem is not related to Eskom plant per se. That's not the bigger set of issues, but it's positioned as if it is. Now, I'm going to break these things down. What is the energy transition and what is the future of coal-fired power? So I'm going to speak about coal-fired power, then I'm going to speak about coal. So what this represents, this diagram is from the National Infrastructure Plan 2050 that was approved by Cabinet in March last year. Now this figure shows, it compares what the IRP 2019 said with what CSIR least cost energy mix would be. Least cost doesn't mean lowest cost. It means the most efficient, least cost approach to a sustainable energy mix towards 2050. One of the biggest differences between these two, and so this becomes cabinet approved. Basically what this document says is the least cost position of CSIR is now the benchmark for 2020. And when the IRP comes out in this year, which it's meant to do, the new IRP, it should reflect the CSIR least cost as the benchmark. So when it comes out, possibly in the next month or two, as stakeholders, that's what you should be watching. You should ask yourself, did they use the least cost CSIR as the last benchmark because this is cabinet approved, or did they not? And if they introduce new coal or nuclear or so on, can it be explained by it being more efficient than the renewables that would be located in the CSIR least cost? If it can be argued from that perspective, then maybe the IRP is appropriate. But when you're critiquing it, you would want to be asking against the least cost CSIR approach, because again, this is cabinet approved. Now, one of the biggest differences between these two approaches was that the IRP 2019 saw new coal-fired power being introduced. The least cost approach of the CSIR sees coal in the future, but it has no new coal-fired power in the mix. It's a big difference. It's very hard to explain how you could have new coal-fired power in the mix, but we will definitely have coal-fired power. It will just be a smaller part of the mix and smaller in scale. And I think people sometimes think it's going out faster than it actually is. This is not a tomorrow type of thing. It's down the road. So and I've given some detail here, but I hope I'll run out of time, but I hope this explains largely where coal-fired power goes. And by 2030, we're largely at about the same level of coal-fired power. And then by 2040, we're at about half the level. And then we get to about, if we take the CSIR approach, we're at about a quarter to a fifth of where we are today in terms of coal-fired power. But that's way down the road. That means you still need coal mines. You may still need new coal mines for that. So when you see the minister, Montash, going out and opening up a mine, that is different than him going to a coal-fired plant. We may well need new mines and refurbished mines to support coal-fired power and new contracts and improvements in the way that it's procured, et cetera. Now, slowing down the shutting of coal plant is possible, but really only over short periods with the aim of sweating the assets, especially in the context of an energy shortage. But we're talking about very short periods of time. It could be like over periods of 5 years. There's no logic at all to retrofitting these plants to make them more environmentally efficient, et cetera. You'd rather actually shut them down. Now, importantly, a study by the ERP at UCT, the Energy, I can't remember what it stands for, Energy Resource, I forget what it's called, or ERC, Energy Resource Center at UCT, did a study to look at the future of coal. And I've also looked at studies that have been made available by the industry, the coal industry. And the idea that the expectation is that coal jobs related to coal-fired power may diminish by 28,000 over this period. So 28,000 jobs. 28K refers to 28,000. So that's what we're talking about. So when people say there's 90,000 jobs in mining, it doesn't mean you're going to lose 90,000 jobs. When we're talking about shutting down Eskom plant, we may lose 28,000 jobs in coal-fired power, in the coal jobs specifically. So we also need to wrap our arms around that particular point, which is a significant number of jobs, but it's not the way it's being positioned. Now, there's a significant shift towards renewable power and associated economies around that, including multi-market opportunities, which means multiple actors supplying, buying, et cetera. There's lots of things that are going to start happening and are getting regulated now and being enabled, private investments and so on. And so huge opportunities coming on stream as well. Now, the future of coal more generally. So approximately 40 to 50% of coal production is destined for export markets. It fell to about 40%, partly because of problems at Richards Bay and to do with a failure in our logistics system, actually, because there's been huge global opportunity to sell coal. Now, we may not want to mine coal. I'm simply explaining the situation. I'm not putting a value statement on this, I should just say. I'm just laying out the facts. We may not want coal production at all, but you know, I'm just making you aware of what the situation is. So about half of coal production is destined for export markets, normally sold at a higher price. Currently, it used to go mainly to the EU. Now 81% goes to Asia, and that's particularly to India. The other markets are Pakistan, South Korea, Turkey, and the UAE. It accounts for about 12% of South African merchandise export revenues. Now, export coal exports are expected to grow by about 5.8% compound annual growth over the next 20 years, just to give you an idea. So therefore, we expect to see growth, even if it's muted compared with the past decade. So when you hear there's sometimes competing information, like India and China have canceled about half of their planned coal plants. But then you see people saying, well, they are investing in coal. Well, they had planned to invest in coal, actually, but they've canceled half their plants. So they still are buying coal, but it's just at a reduced rate. So therefore, it's 5.8% as opposed to the mega growth that we saw in previous years. But there still is actually growth. Now, global demand has grown substantially, but South African exports have stagnated. And again, that's because of logistics problems mostly. And this partly explains the jobs challenge that we're experiencing. It's not so much to do with Eskom and has a lot more to do, I would think, with our coal export problem. So if we're going to be expanding, if we do want to expand this global demand, we want to save these jobs in coal mining, and we may or may not want to, but if we do want to, then the most important thing actually is just have that ecosystem, which we need in any case for other minerals and other goods that we have to get out to market. It's not unique to coal, but it has affected coal exports. So again, I'm not laying a value on that. I'm just explaining it. We may not want to be doing coal mining. I'm just explaining it. Now, the scope of coal employment in South Africa, about 150,000 direct jobs are located in the coal economy more broadly, with 3/4 of these jobs linked to production and transport of coal. I lay out what the proportions are here, with mining taking about 91,500. But again, that is not the number of jobs that would be lost. The number of jobs that might be lost are closer to maybe 28,000. In Mpumalanga specifically, that's about 80% of coal mining production. So that's why we tend to focus on Mpumalanga in relation to this just energy transition set of issues. and very focused in certain municipalities and districts, as we well know. And these are listed here. The issue here is also that the job quality with high levels of unionization, pay, and benefits, and these industries are very high, even though the education levels of workers tends to be grade 12 or less, and therefore it's very hard to find an equivalent opportunity, which means that unions will dig their heels in. It's very hard to argue that there will be anything else for these people that is commensurate with these kinds of jobs. Having said that, they would be cleaner, people will be healthier, they won't have respiratory problems, maybe less cancer, etc., but they won't be earning as much is the issue here. Also, if people were older, it may be easier to argue, but the median age is 38 years. So a good number of these people are actually young and very far from retirement. There's a second set of issues that ESCOM delivers a lot of municipal services in municipalities that are relatively underfunded and not operating with strong service delivery. So as if ESCOM does, say, shut down or move out or scale down, then those services are likely to also go with it. And that's a very big issue and something that Trialogue membership may want to be thinking about and probably already is. I've already spoken to the job loss issue. So I'm just giving the trend in coal mining employment, which has been highly volatile relative to the rest of mining. In any case, it was kind of at a height actually in 1980 with about 135,000 jobs and fell already to about maybe 50,000 in 2003. So, it's been highly volatile in any case. Now, so economy-wide impacts of the just energy transition. So the issue is not just located in coal, but is a wider set of issues. Now, I was speaking to the very strong stakeholders in this area that on both sides have been kind of, I think, creating a situation that holds back progress. Now, whatever the pace of progress, whether we should not be retrofitting plant. We may extend the life of plant for a few years so that we improve the energy availability in some of them. And that is certainly possible and would make more energy plausible. But we're not talking about extending the life for 20 years or 10 years. That would be crazy. So whatever the pace of progress is, these are marginal decisions actually, and we should understand that that's actually what they are. They get positioned as big decisions, but actually they're small decisions. And whatever happens, the just element actually for everybody in the economy should be that we get to clear decision-making and timeous action. And that may influence the kind of lobbying that we need to see. Now, the challenges in the energy-related decision-making, in other words, slow decision-making, the kind of corruption that we found in ESCOM, the crazy coal contracts. I mean, almost none of the plants are receiving coal in a way that is sustainable anymore. What that's led to, poor performance, and this is quoted from the National Infrastructure Plan. Poor performance in public infrastructure investment is calculated to have diminished GDP by 1.8% annually between 2010 and 2017. Therefore, foregoing a possible 1 million jobs created. In other words, we could have created an extra 1 million jobs had there been better delivery, and most of that would be in energy, transport, and water. Now, secondly, job creation in aggregate has been depressed by these forces holding back transition. So the Reserve Bank says GDP would be 2% higher if not for load shedding. I mean, the load shedding as we're experiencing it now at stage 4, stage 6, that type of thing. Now we're going into stage 8. They anticipate that GDP is going to be 2% lower in 2023 than it would have otherwise have been. And that's only 1 year of that. There was also 2022 and 2021, et cetera. But just in 2023, if they're right, then we would have lost 180,000 jobs in 2023 alone because of that. Either we lose them or we don't create them. Now, that's in comparison to losing the 28,000 jobs I referred to in coal over maybe 10 or 20 years. So it's just to position it. It's not to say that the 28,000 in coal don't matter. They do matter. But there are much bigger ticket issues in the economy. And again, that doesn't mean slowing down or speeding up the transition, but actually locking into some kind of path that we can agree on and getting moving, moving on it, and not making these, not letting stakeholder and entrenched interests stop the progress, both in terms of needing new coal mines actually, and also in fast tracking the need of new renewables. Now, there's another set of issues related to energy intensive investments that were established when electricity was cheap and plentiful, where South Africa really has no competitive advantage. And a stark example of that is aluminum smelting, but there are many others, and they will certainly lose out over this period. They're not big job creators, most certainly, but they are entrenched interests and will be damaged through this period. So I just wanted to position the job losses. And this is not to say, I spent my life working on unemployment creation. So and I was at the HSRC, by the way, and not CSIR. So no offense to my former employers. But my life's work has really been about how you create jobs. But that doesn't mean that you don't lose jobs. Part of job creation is to think about how you create new industries and how you help people across to new industries. The best way of ensuring that you don't create jobs is by being stagnant. And that's kind of what we're doing now. We have high unemployment in South Africa, high sustained unemployment over decades, partly because we're stagnating and we don't enable these transitions. And now, just to position the kinds of jobs we're talking about, the Eskom workforce fell from about 50,000 people to 30,000 between 1990 and 2001. And of course grew. Now it's probably set to fall. Now, the reason it fell is because of technological change. Telecom, equally, where I used to work, I wasn't there in 1991. I was there in 2013. But in 1991, 68,000 people worked in telecom. It fell to 50,000 in 2000 and to 22,000 in 2022. I'm sorry, that's wrong. To 22, that's meant to say by 2012, to about 12,000 in 2022. So there were about 21,000 people when I joined. Now, the thing that you need to know in these places is that you would go into a telecom exchange that used to be full of people, and there's just nobody there anymore. I mean, the equipment is small. You don't need the building anymore. When you move from copper to fiber, you just don't need people to fix it anymore. It doesn't break down in the same way. So you can say, well, we should keep to copper, but then you're going to have lines that aren't working, and then you're not enabling the economy to be efficient in relation to telecommunication. Then you're not enabling newer industries to evolve. So do you care more about the jobs in telecom, or do you care more about the jobs in the entire economy? It's a big issue. And we had very intense discussions with the unions about this. Now, we weren't letting go the 68,000. We were dealing with a much smaller group of people, but still, it was a very substantial group of people. And what we did, and I'll tell you as chief of strategy at Telecom, dealing with this set of issues, one of the challenges was that there was very little help around social plan issues in the country. I had to look further afield. I used the model of Tata Steel, which helped people out of their jobs. We paid people very generously out of their jobs and had voluntary severance packages and retraining and all kinds of things that were modeled on foreign programs. And I just couldn't find help with how you design a social plan in South Africa. Now, hopefully that has improved, but it's a big, big issue when we're now looking at the coal jobs and what's going on in Mpumalanga and how to manage that, because a job out of coal is not necessarily a one-for-one shift into some other area. Now, mining employment of about 460,000 has been pretty stable, but there have been huge shifts underneath. There's been a lot of losses in coal, a lot of losses in gold, and a lot of increases in new metals. So, even within mining, there's been losses and so on. So now, what are the greatest risks? I'm sorry I'm running over time. I'll just need a couple of minutes. to finish. I think I've got a couple extra slides. So what are the greatest risks with respect to the just energy transition? Firstly, I think it's very well known, your previous presentations raised this, is that of course, climate change and its impact, which we've seen in South Africa around weather, droughts, flooding, and straining health systems. Now, I think one of my points is that we need to focus on risks that are associated with less voice. Less voice, meaning the strongest voices appear to be organized labor and elements of business that stand to lose out and that aren't adapting to potential opportunity and the backlash against that. And we get caught within that discourse. But the weaker voices are those of communities affected by weather, energy, and water shortages and flooding. And I also have to say, with the loss of jobs across the economy, that which are far greater than what is being impacted within this coal versus renewable debate and the locking in of behavior and position. Now there's a second set of issues which relates to a diminishing capability in the state, which is reducing climate resilience. Now, the National Infrastructure Plan 2050 raises many of these issues, and I would urge you to see what it proposes in relation to this. But just in summary, there are huge issues related to water management, road building, flood control, etc. For example, just the ability to monitor water systems. Then there's the municipal capabilities. Just the previous video was looking at being able to maintain municipal systems, and the ability to have some agency around that is absolutely critical. That brand water video I saw just before I joined as an example. Now, of course, in Mpumalanga, that's where communities are going to be affected in the largest numbers. And there may be a loss of municipal services as Eskom scales back, and that needs to be attended to. And then there's a whole lot of regulatory aspects with the creation of energy multi-markets. It means a whole lot of new players in there, and the pace of systems builds, the reshaping of Eskom in response, and just generally being able to cope with that transition. I think the central economic opportunities, and again, I hope you'll see these as notes. I have run out of time, so I won't go over these, but I think people know them quite well. Firstly, there is a provincial economic strategy, and Mpumalanga has been, to be honest, I led a study when I was at HSRC for Mpumalanga in secondary industry development. I'm not sure if anything happened with it, but it's probably 20 years ago that was done. A provincial economic strategy really needs to be developed and if developed, implemented, and done. Mpumalanga in any case suffers from a lack of diversification. And even if there wasn't a need for a just economic transition, these actions would be needed in any case, because Mpumalanga in any case has very high unemployment, poverty levels, low levels of diversification, and low human development indices relative to the South African average. So no matter what, this needs to happen. There are a whole range of amazing opportunities around renewable energy, green hydrogen, in agriculture, forestry, tourism. Environmental rehabilitation is going to could create enormous numbers of jobs in manufacturing, and even in mining, and potentially even in coal, much less newer, minerals related to newer industries such as copper, manganese, and platinum. But even in coal, if we want to have coal mining jobs, and that's a question, then we need a coal strategy that relates to the emerging environment, which we don't have. So I'll just conclude there. The first is, please don't fall into the trap of coal versus RE. They're not actually really trade-offs in any meaningful way. Social plan activities for working communities that could lose their jobs, it's expected to be closer to 28,000. It is a substantial number of people, particularly in a very poor communities. But that may be more related to social plan capabilities, because the jobs that are created will not be commensurate with the I won't say the quality of those jobs, but the pay and pensions that those workers have. Very unlikely that anything that gets created now will be commensurate to those. So those people will need social plan support, and new jobs will need to be created for other people or even them. There needs to be a great focus on promoting economic dynamism that creates more jobs. And then, of course, mitigation adaptation efforts are needed across the board. So that's me. And thank you so much for your attention. And I apologize for going well over time.